The Army or the Supreme Council of Armed Forces on their Facebook page yesterday said that this was a foreign conspiracy against Egypt. And what this denotes that there's a huge schism, a political and also an ideological schism between the population and the army. Purely the protesters were out there protesting due to the rigged electoral process. It was far from successful. Yes, in terms of numbers, in terms of turnout, in terms of a historic electoral landmark in the Egyptian political landscape, yes, it was. But also what we've seen is there's been a lot of rigging. And what proved it yesterday is that there are 6 dead and over 300 injured. If the army wasn't afraid of its population and a free and democratic elections, why are they engaging in such brutal tactics?
So who's doing the rigging though? Because obviously the Islamists stand to benefit from these elections.
Well, I mean, there have been ex-NDP members, the National Democratic Party members of the Mubarak regime. They have been running even in the so-called liberal parties, which is called the Egyptian Bloc and the Free Egyptian Party, run by Naguib Sawiris. That has on its candidates list a lot of ex-NDP members. There's been lots of incidents of one voter taking the votes of over 100 people. Lots of bribes on the street, so on. But the electoral process pales in comparison to the violence that preceded the elections in the first round, November 28, and the violence that we saw yesterday. In the past 2 weeks, what we've counted, as much as we've been counting votes, we've also been counting bodies.
What hope do you think then there is of a resolution between the military and its opponents in the months ahead when we might have at least an outcome from the elections? What hope is there of a reduction in military power?
I think we're at a threshold point zero of no return. And with the Arab revolutions a year today being the anniversary, what we've seen is that populations will not give up on this fight. They actually have more resolve. With more violence, with more bloodshed, people are more motivated to go up. It's just normal political behavior and social behavior. So especially in a region that's been repressed for 30 or 60 years since the era of decolonization, I think the army will have to come at a resolution with the population. And what I mean by the population, a diverse cross-section of it, not just these so-called representatives. Notice that yesterday there's a consultative council between the army and the Egyptian people. 2 of these members, high-profile members, have resigned yesterday over the violence. This tarnishes the image of the army and the Egyptian polity being cohesive. So it'll be very interesting in that Egypt is central in the Arab revolutions.
Let's look at Tunisia now, a country that's further down the revolutionary road, if you like. And as you mentioned, it was a year to the day since Mohamed Bouazizi, that man, set himself alight, which really triggered this whole thing. A year on, where do you see Tunisia and how do you assess the sort of progress that's been made there?
I think Tunisia has been, if not the most successful revolution, but we tend to forget that it's only been a year. It's still ongoing. It'll take many years for it to be, in a sense, garnering the same democratic standards of what we think of in the West. But I think they've done it actually quite beautifully. We're a human rights activist who has been locked up, who has been tortured by the Zine Ali bin Ali regime, is now the Tunisian president, Monsef Marzouki. But even then, Tunisia has had it's in a different geographical and political context because they've had links to a French Revolution, but also the place of women in society and so on. Let's just remember, and I'll end with this, with Mark Twain, that history doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes, and what we're seeing is that there are constant rhythms and rhyming, and each one is contextual based on its own specificity.